when you're communicating with staff, you want them to understand that, hey, if I say dépouillage, they need to know what dépouillage means. So if I say sec, S-E-C, they need to know what that means. So all this is pertaining to sauces. So that's what we're going to talk about today. When you're cooking at home or cooking anywhere, you're kind of, there's this big mass of just information as far as sauces are concerned. So what the French did, and I was classically trained in French technique at the CIA, at the Culinary Institute of America, is they classified it into mother sauces. So the second piece of paper you all have at your place setting is what's called mother sauces. There's 5 mother sauces, and from those mother sauces, you're able to get derivative sauces, as they call it. So if I have a Hollandaise, just a basic prepared Hollandaise, which I'm actually going to prepare today, if I add a tomato product to it, like tomato paste, and mix it in, it becomes sauce Charon. And so there's so many derivatives that you can get from that one sauce itself. So we'll go a little bit into that. Does anybody, and stop me at any time if anybody has any questions on anything. If it's a simple or complex question, by all means, let's make it as interactive as possible. But again, you can see the mother sauces as it breaks down. The basic mother sauce looks very simple. So you have a bechamel, a velouté, espagnole, tomato, and hollandaise. Those are the 5 mother sauces. And I'll explain a little bit later once I get into bechamel and velouté what the difference is between the 2 of them. So the first thing is called sauce espagnole. So obviously it means Spanish and French. Basically there's a whole debacle on how it started back in the day. Louis XIII's wife, I think, had added tomatoes to a French sauce, and then it became sauce espagnole. But essentially it's a brown stock or a brown sauce that we make, and we fortify it with more ingredients. So it's almost the same exact process. And I'm not going to go into that process, but I will explain some of it, and the reasons why is because it bridges into different sauces. Okay? I'll get 50 to 100 to 150 pounds in a week, and we roast these off. So this still has a little frost on it because, again, it just came in from the delivery truck. But these are knuckles or femur bones, however you want to call it. We roast these off until they get nice and dark. That's where you're going to get your color from your sauce from. So we roast them off in a 450-degree oven until they're nice and dark. And then we add Mirepoix, tomato paste, all that kind of stuff. So you'll see in the recipe, it probably says pincé tomato paste. That's to actually saute tomato paste and caramelize it. So that's where you get more color from. So you're developing the sauce in this whole process that we do. And so when we make brown stock, it doesn't say it here, but when you're doing an espagnole, it's a little less time because you're fortifying it. But when we make brown stock or veal stock, it literally cooks overnight for about 12 hours. We'll come in the next day, we'll drain it, we'll reduce it, and then that same batch, we'll fortify it again, and we'll do what's called a remoulage. So a remoulage is a second running of veal stock. So you are able to use that for soups and things like that. The first running you use for sauces, the second running you use for soups. And when you're cooking it for that long of a time frame, what you're doing is you're getting out this bone marrow. So that bone marrow results in a very gelatinous stock. So literally when I put it in the fridge and I cool it down and I bring it down to temperature, I come back in the next day and it's like Jell-O. And that Jell-O gelatinous viscosity that we're looking for actually comes from the bone marrow. One of the things I did want to demonstrate was called sachet d'épices. So sachet d'épices, again in French, is just translated as bag of spices. Anytime you cut cheesecloth, it doesn't matter the brand that you get or anything, if you cut a section of it like this, you're basically going to unfold it like this. If I keep unfolding it, it's basically 4 layers when it's folded. I don't want 4 layers, it's just a waste of it. I can use it for something else. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to do 2 layers. And so sachet d'épices again is basically taking the bay leaf, the garlic, some peppercorns, and you take some parsley stems. You don't want the leaves of the parsley because they're sweet at the beginning, but then they start turning bitter on you. So you want the parsley stems. And then a little bit of thyme, fresh thyme. So that's a sachet d'épices. And you can add it to stuff, and the reason that you're doing it in this format is basically when you add it to something and you're controlling the flavor, once you have the flavor you're looking for, you can actually just pull it out and discard it. All you would do is just tie it with some twine. So we're gonna make a bag, and that's it. The first thing we're gonna make is a bechamel. So bechamel is a classic mother sauce. Again, you can add stuff to it. The only difference between a bechamel and a velouté is one is made with stock, which is the velouté, and a bechamel is made with milk or dairy. So that's the only difference. They have different applications. So like a veloute you can use in soups, a bechamel you can use in a pasta dish, things like that. And then again, you have the derivative sauces listed there. If you want to add different products to it, you get different sauces. So one of the sauces we just had the other day when we did a flounder stuffed with crab meat, we did sauce Aurore. So Aurore is basically a tomato puree added to veloute, becomes a whole new sauce. So it was a little bit different. So you'll see in there for the bechamel or either one, bechamel or the veloute, you can start off with what's called white mirepoix. So when you're doing mirepoix is always onions, carrots, celery. But in this case, you want it to be a white mirepoix because you don't want that color in there. You don't want the color of the carrots. You don't want. I have some butter in the pan here, so you can all see that. Just a little bit of butter. And anytime you see the word sweat, so you'll see it in there underneath the recipe, it'll say sweat your white mirepoix. And sweating just means low heat, little bit of oil or butter, and just make your vegetables cook down a little bit. It usually would take about 45 minutes to sweat a vegetable. You're trying to extract as much flavor as you possibly can, and you're trying to get them as translucent and tender as you possibly can as well. So you're just trying to draw out all that flavor. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a white mirepoix of mushrooms, shallots, and leeks. So the leeks themselves, anytime you're using these leeks, you always want to trim it kind of where it starts kind of blossoming at the top. So and everything has an application. So you can use all these items. So this can be for stock. So it can go into your veal stock, it can go into your chicken stock. Same thing with these, you could, but what I like to actually do is I make ash with it. So I'll make a leek ash. I'll basically just put it in the oven for an hour for 450 degrees, and it basically just darkens it, and then I pulverize it in a coffee grinder, and then I have a powder that has a very kind of earthy tone to it, and then I'll do like mosaics and things like that. So that's a good application for it. So leeks, again, anytime you're cleaning leeks, you always want to split it halfway, wash out everything that's in there, because dirt does get into the crevices and everything, so you want to wash that out. So all we're going to do, just for demonstration purposes, we'll get some vegetables in there. I don't know if my hat's in the way. So we're going to push that to the side. We'll do a couple mushrooms. And again, I've done this in different classes, but basically, you know, the way you're using your knife, you always want to basically, your first set of knuckles and your second set of knuckles just smacks up against it. You never lift it higher than your knuckles so you won't cut yourself. And then you can just go to town. And all you're doing is adjusting your fingers. So I'm actually only using my first set of knuckles on that just because it's so tall. And then again, so now I'm using the back of my knife and doing a slicing motion instead of an up and down motion like this, just because, you know, it's a little bit of a denser item. So we have a little bit of butter in there. We have our white mirepoix. And again, heat-wise, you'd be on really low heat. But again, for demonstration purposes, I'm just trying to push the time a little bit. And then I'm going to make a roux. So I would sweat this again for about 45 minutes. I'd make a roux. Everybody uses roux in their kitchen. There's three types of roux. There's a white roux, or also known as a pale roux, a blonde roux, and also a brown roux. Each one has different applications. So this one, you're just looking for a white. You can even go pale if you wanted to. So basically, it's determined by the amount of time you're cooking it. So a brown roux is used a lot in Creole cooking, gumbos, things like that. And a roux is equal parts of butter to flour. So if you're using 8 ounces of butter, it's 8 ounces of flour. That's it. That's as simple as it is. And then how much you cook it is dependent on what you're using it for. So I'm going to let that go a little bit. I've got the milk heating up. Anytime you're adding a liquid to a roux, you always want the liquid cooler than the actual roux. So you don't want this to be hotter than that. Everything needs to be cooler than the roux itself. And the reason being is you need to incorporate it a little more slower. So as you're bringing it up to temp, it'll incorporate. We're going to crank the heat up a little bit on this. a lot of times, like gravies, things like that, you'll have a floury taste to it. So how do you get that flour taste out? Really, you keep cooking it. So you need to cook it above 20 minutes. I always try to go 30 minutes, but if you go at least 20 minutes, it's going to get that floury taste out. So you'll also have to be careful not to burn the roux. So the roux always try to stick to the bottom of the pan, so you always got to keep stirring it. But the roux itself, again, needs to cook out of your bechamel, your velouté, your gravy, whatever you're making, within 20 to 30 minutes it takes. So it's almost melted. I'm just going to add my flour, and that's it. That's a roux. Once it's combined, I'm only going to cook it for about 4 minutes or so. And again, that gets a little bit of that flour flavor and taste out. But really, the only way to get it out is once you combine it with the liquid and everything's incorporated, is to cook it for about 20 to 30 minutes. Yeah, when somebody says white sauce, that is what they're talking about. I'd say 90% of the time. And again, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to start incorporating this, and you'll see how it gets thicker. And as you add more liquid to it, obviously it's going to get more thinned out. And really it's going to depend on what you're making, but you could use anywhere from 12 ounces of roux, so 6 ounces of each, butter and flour, to 24 ounces per gallon. So again, just depends what you're making. So I won't incorporate all that, but again, as you're adding more of your dairy product to it, essentially it's going to thin out. Cook it for 30 minutes with the sachet piece in there, and then you would strain everything out, season it, all that kind of stuff. So Hollandaise, this is one of my favorite sauces. Who here has made and gone through the trek of making Hollandaise from scratch? Anybody? I see a couple hands. So it's fun, it has a lot of science behind it. So I'm going to get my water bath going so it's ready when I need it. And then I'm also going to get the butter melted. So anytime you're making, that's just a little bit of butter, right? Anytime you're making Hollandaise, you're going to see that the recipe calls for clarified butter. And that's how we were trained. It's clarified butter. That it doesn't have any water in it, doesn't have any milk solids, things like that. Once I got out of culinary school, the chefs I worked for were just like, forget everything you learned. And this is the reason why, is that one of the chefs actually at school kind of turned me on to this. So it was kind of before I got out. But he was like, why are you taking the milk solids out? Why are you taking some of the ingredients out of the butter? You're losing flavor. So, ever since that point, I've never clarified the butter. So the clarifying butter is a whole process in its own. So I actually just use whole butter. And when you're using whole butter, always use unsalted butter. So that's all we cook with in the kitchen. When we have butters on the table, that butter we've actually salted. So it's unsalted butter whipped with salt added to it, because that's what everybody's familiar with, is that salted butter sensation. But when we're cooking, it's always unsalted, always whole butter. Another thing too, and I brought this pot out, I'm not going to use it, but the reason I brought it out is just to explain. You can see that this is stainless steel, heavy bottom pots. This is not. This is aluminum. So, and it's the same thickness all the way around. These are going to have a much better even cooking temperature throughout, as well as this will not absorb anything. If you put a tomato sauce in here, lemon juice, anything that is acidic, this actual aluminum leaches into what you're making. So, and again, aluminum does create Alzheimer's and a couple other things. So, just a word of advice: try not to use aluminum when it comes to sauces and acidic products. So the butter's good and melted. We're going to leave that right here to the side. As that's going, we're going to make what's called a gastrique. But a gastrique, and it's listed there. So usually it's just white wine, and you can add other acids to it as well. But it could be white wine, could be vinegar, could be lemon juice, and then other flavoring agents. So in this particular one, I have some mixed peppercorns. So different color peppercorns. And we're just going to put that in there. And then I'll come to this side. And you would mince this up, but again, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to put it in there. So that's shallots. Shallots. So essentially, and I'll put this on high heat to get it going, but that's the ingredients right there. So that is a gastrique. The reason you're doing this is for a couple reasons. One, you're adding flavor to your eggs and your sauce, but you're also, when you add this to your eggs, it's starting to denature the protein. So it's starting to wake up the proteins and saying, hey, we're about to do something here. So it would get them onto that path. But the main thing is for the flavoring agent. You're going to reduce it down to what's called sec. So again, S-E-C, sec means dry. So you're going to reduce it down all the way to dry. So if I was to take this white wine and add it to the egg yolks, it'd start curdling the egg yolks. Because again, you have the acid and then you have the egg yolks. And you don't want that to happen. You want it to be the flavoring agent or addition. Balloon whisks, this is one of my favorites as far as the shape and everything. You can find them more slender, you can find them all different shapes and sizes, but this by far is what I use in the best. So what we're doing is basically I have a water bath here. When you're doing a water bath, you don't want to have a small bowl so that it's sitting in the water. You don't want the water to touch the base at all. You don't want the flame to come up the sides and then start burning the edge here. So basically this is like the perfect setup that you're looking for when you're doing water baths. I have the water there. It's going to come up to about 190, 200 degrees. You don't want to boil it. You just want to kind of simmer it. And basically, I'm going to set that on there. As this is going, it's going to, again, reduce down. All I'm going to do is splash a little bit of water on it when it's completely dry, and then I'm going to put that into my egg mixture. Whenever you're whisking, again, I've gone over this in a couple other classes as well, but if I whisk this way, I forgot I had the camera there. If I whisk this way, it's just going around in a circle and it's not hitting what's in the center. So then if I whisk this way, it's hitting what's in the center, but not going all the way around. So what I do is I do what's called a figure eight. So basically, and your hand gets kind of used to doing that. So you'll do a figure eight like this. And that way everything gets incorporated. It kind of brings everything back around. I've been doing it for 25 years, so it's a little easy for me. So Hollandaise is one of those sauces, and again, I have the information there on the sheet. It's an emulsion. So there's 3 different emulsions, as you could say. There's a temporary, so if I took oil and vinegar and I shook it up, it's going to emulsify, but then as soon as I set it down on the table, it's going to start separating. So then there's a semi-permanent, which means there needs to be a lot of conditions around that emulsion that keep it together. This is a semi-permanent emulsion. So once I have this emulsion done, emulsion just means the bonding of the fat and the other proteins. Once I have that done, I've got to keep it at a certain heat. I've got to keep it, I mean, there's a lot of things you have to do in order to keep it emulsified. If you don't, you have it too hot, it's going to break. If you have it too cold, it's going to solidify. So there's a lot of, and then of course you have permanent emulsion, which is like mayonnaise. You can't separate that, even if you try. So this is almost ready. You can see it there. I'm going to let it go just a little bit more. My water is ready as far as my water bath. And now when I'm doing this, basically, once I add this, I'm going to let it go just a little bit more. Once I add this to this, what I'm looking for is for that egg yolk to get a little bit thicker. So as I'm doing this, I'll start seeing ribbons. So as I sit there and go back and forth, I'll start seeing it trace or leave tracks in it. I'll let that. And then I'm just going to splash it with some water, get some of that liquid off the bottom. And you don't want it to cook, so obviously I wouldn't add it straight all the way right now. I'm going to let it kind of temp out a little bit. And you can put it all in there. You could put the shallots and everything, because you're going to end up straining it anyways. And now I'll move this to that one so you can see. Musical pots. And so when I'm on the line, and let's say we don't have Hollandaise, prepared, and we don't have it on the menu or whatever, if somebody comes in, we want to be able to accommodate them, and if we have the time, we do it. So this takes a lot of time to do a water bath, to do all that. I don't go that far. So literally, as I do it, like what's called a la minute. If I'm doing it on the line, I'll literally take a bowl like this with eggs and put it over the flame and just keep going back and forth like this. But again, that takes years to kind of get to know what's going on with the eggs. So you don't necessarily have to do a water bath. I mean, if you got really good at it, you could do it over the flame. I don't suggest it to start off with, though. And you do have to kind of bring it back and forth off the flame, just so you're not getting it too hot. So we're almost there. You can see it's starting to lighten up a little bit. It's starting to get a little bit thicker. We'll go a little bit more. So in here I have 4 egg yolks, just like the recipe says there. But 1 egg yolk will actually hold and emulsify with 96 ounces of fat. So it's almost mind-boggling to think about, but literally it would hold almost a gallon of fat, 1 egg yolk, if you emulsify it correctly. We're not going to try that out, so we're using 4 egg yolks. And now when you're doing this, sometimes it takes a little bit of help from somebody else, or you can do something like this. So what I'm doing is I'm stabilizing my bowl, and you'll see why in a second. So I use an upside down plate cover. So this is how I do it in the kitchen if I'm, the one preparing it and I'm kind of by myself. Go a little bit more. Put that there. And so the reason I'm stabilizing it is because I'm only going to be able to use one hand. So that whole butter that we have, again, it's not really hot right now because I've let it kind of cool off a little bit. But as I add it, basically I'm just kind of dripping into this. And you don't want to go too fast. If I go too fast, it breaks. If I go too slow, I overwhip it. So it's got to be a nice blend or stream. And you can see it's starting to get thicker. If it was to get too thick on you, because that's how mayonnaise is made, almost essentially the same way. If you're starting to get a mayonnaise-like consistency, you would just thin it out with a droplet of water. And as you start adding, you'll be able to add more quicker as you increase the volume. And with whole butter, you have to keep in mind too that you have those milk solids, you have the water content. It would thin out your Hollandaise if you add too much of it. So you just want to have a nice viscosity and nice ratio. So this will be the last one I add, but I could essentially add all that plus another gallon or 2. So you can see the viscosity of it. That's a Hollandaise. So I would take it at this point and I would strain it. So I'll actually do that for you. So we're gonna strain it, and it wouldn't be through a fine strainer like a chinois. It would just be through a sieve like this, so that way you're not having to press it through, but you're able to get out the peppercorns and everything else. And then the ingredients that we use to season it are kosher salt, white pepper, because we don't want to, depending on its usage, you don't want to see the specks. Anytime you're using Hollandaise, typically it's going to be for seafood of some sort, so you want it to be a little bit lighter. So seafood always gets seasoned with white pepper. Meats, chicken, always black pepper. It's just a more delicate pepper. And I'm not going to move the camera for this because I'm just going to show the seasoning. So essentially you get a little bit of salt, kosher salt, always kosher salt because it's a puff crystal and it tends to dissolve more evenly. Just a dash, and you could use Tabasco or you could use cayenne pepper, either one. And then for demonstration, because I won't be able to get seeds in it this way, is squeeze a little bit of lemon juice. And then if you incorporate those, That's it. So that's a Hollandaise, and you could put that on eggs Benedict, you could put it on steaks, you could put it on seafood, but that's all it is. It's just the egg yolks. I say that's all it is, but. Does anybody have any questions on Hollandaise? It's a very universal sauce. It has a lot of derivatives. You could actually whip up some whipped cream, fold it into that, and it becomes a different sauce. So not sweetened whipped cream, but more of a savory. So the next one is going to be a Burr Blanc. So we make a Burr Blanc every single day. We use it in different applications. I've actually started working more closely with some of the staff in the kitchen that's making it, because the process they were doing wasn't resulting in a very thick, viscous sauce, because the viscosity should be like that of the Hollandaise. And you'll see what happens with that process. So essentially, you're doing almost the same thing, except this time, it's not really a gastrique, it's more of a reduction. So we're gonna do the same thing with the shallots. So we're gonna put shallots in there. We got some peppercorns. And then this is white wine. And we won't put too much, so that way it reduces quick. So you would do the exact same thing with that. You would reduce this down until sec, what's called sec again. Once it's sec, you would actually add some cream.
Chef, when you're reducing, does the temperature matter?
You don't want it too hot, so you can see, just again, for demonstration purposes, I'm trying to rush along a little bit. With this, it's a slow process. Literally I would do probably medium to medium low heat, and literally just to make this reduction takes us about an hour every day. You just kind of put it on the stove, let it go, do its thing, add your cream, do it again. So when you're reducing the white wine, again, you want it to reduce the sec, you put the cream in there and you reduce it to what's called nappe. So nappe means that if you stick a spoon in there and you bring it up, it'll coat the back of the spoon. That's what nappe means. So yeah, your temperature doesn't want to be as high as I'm doing right now. Again, this is just more for demo.
Just regular cooking wine, okay?
Yes, yeah, any kind of cooking wine and whatever you're comfortable with. Again, depending on the usage and the application, that could determine what wine you're using. You could use a Chardonnay for a more robust, or you could use something like a Semillon or a lot of different lighter whites. So we'll let that go a little bit. And then the emulsification that I'm doing with this particular one, again, involves butter, but on the last one I melted the butter and added it. This one's the opposite. I'm taking chilled cold butter, so I had this in ice back here, and it's gotta be ice cold butter that I'm incorporating into this hot mixture. And you'll see how we do it and what it's called and all that kind of stuff. And in this one at the end, you do want to strain it through a fine meshed chinois, as we call it. So this is a chinois. I've recently changed to using plastic instead of metal, because what happens a lot of times with kitchen staff is they'll take a spoon, like this guy here, and if it was a metal one, they'll start going like this, and they'll start hitting it to get it to go through. You're technically not even supposed to do that. You're supposed to only leave it like that and let it do its business on its own by gravity. But if you do want to rush it, typically you would use the back of your hand and go like this. So now if they do it with plastic, they're going to break this. And I'm going to yell at them for breaking $120 chinois. So now they go like this with their hand, and it will rush it through, but it won't break it. So we'll say for reasons of demonstration that this is good. So I have everything in here. I have the white wine, I have the peppercorns, the shallots. I've reduced it down to sec, dry, then added the cream, reduced that down to nappe. So now what I want to do is I still want to keep heat on it. So you want to, again, have chilled butter. And this process is called monte au beurre. So anytime, again, I'm in the kitchen, I'm like, Vinny, monte au beurre, a little bit of butter into that sauce or whatever. He'd be like, yes, chef. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. Monte au beurre is the practice of taking chilled butter cubes and adding it to a hot liquid and keep stirring it so that, again, it creates that semi-permanent emulsion. So we're going to kick up the heat just a little bit. And essentially I'd add cubes of butter in there and just keep stirring it. And you can see there's steam coming off, so it's not chilled. And I wouldn't dump this whole thing in there because it's not gonna create, again, that emulsion. It's just gonna melt on you. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm adding the butter, and then when it gets to a little bit smaller than this, I'm just gonna add a little bit more butter, and then just keep the process going. And then again, this has derivatives that you could use. So this is considered not a mother sauce, but this is a sauce that we use on a daily basis. I mean, when you think of all the sauces out there, I mean, there's condiments, there's all sorts of dessert sauces, coulis, which are purees. I mean, there's so many sauces. So I did want to touch on a sauce that wasn't a mother sauce. So again, the butter's melted, and then I'm just going to add a couple more cubes. And then we just keep going with that process. But the biggest thing where you're gonna get your emulsion from is from that base that you create. So if your base is broke, you're gonna get a broken butter sauce. So you always want that cream to come down slow and become thick. Has anybody made any Burr Blancs at home? Very nice. And if I was to take this butter and I was to put it in a pan by itself with no reduction and no base, it's not gonna create that emulsion. Again, you're just gonna end up with melted butter. So you need to have that base. So we'll do the rest of this just because we'll get the volume up so that we can strain it in here. And again, we'll dissolve that butter, we'll melt that butter down until it's all dissipated and blend it into the sauce. We'll strain it out and we'll season it the same exact way because again, Burr Blancs we're gonna use for a lot of seafood, lighter things. So kosher salt, pure ground white pepper, a little bit of lemon juice right at the end. No Tabasco in this one because you want it to be kind of a subtle sauce. You don't want to have that spicy note. You could add it in the beginning. I just feel like if you put it in the end, it kind of freshens it up. If you put it in the beginning, you're going to kind of lose that nice sharpness. All right. And then we go through the chinois and strain everything out. At this point, you would season it up, and you can see the viscosity again. I'll get a spoon just so you can see. So it's nice and thick, has some viscosity to it, and then that's what you would put over the fish and stuff. So that's a Burr Blanc. And then the last thing I'm going to do here is just kind of show you how to paint on plates and kind of play with the food a little bit. So the dessert, again, that you're getting today that Jim prepared back there, he's painted on the plate, he's filled it in, so that's what I'm gonna show you how to do. So this is a pretty cool thing in itself. So what I do a lot of times is you want it to be very fine as far as your lines that you're doing when you're painting. So I make my own cones or bags. So what I just did was took parchment paper, cut it in half, and then I cut that into half in a triangle shape. And you'll see why. So I'm left with this. Parchment, always use parchment paper. Wax paper you could use, it just doesn't have the same applications and stuff like that. So all I'm doing is I'm putting my finger in the middle of the paper like this, and I'm just folding it right where my finger meets the paper. Just going all the way down. So I just get my thumb right where that is, and then I'm just gonna take this and fold it in. Some people would staple it at this point if they have to do a bunch of them, or they would tape it or whatever. I'm not gonna do that. We'll make sure this chocolate, so again, Jim did the class with the chocolates, tempering, melting, the whole 9 yards. This is just a 74% chocolate. I want something that's gonna be able to harden up pretty quick. And the reason why is because it's gonna be a painted plate. And And then talking about more sauces. So we have a caramel sauce here that we made. We have a raspberry puree that we made, and a creme anglaise. So creme anglaise is just egg, cream, sugar in each of those. Heat up your cream, temper it, which means adding a little bit to your eggs, mixing it, and then putting it back in. In this one we have vanilla bean as well. And then you basically bring it up to heat. It thickens itself, almost like making a pudding. All right, we're right there on the chocolate. When you've been in the business so long, you don't have fingerprints anymore, so nothing's hot. All right, so then when I'm filling the bag, so I fill the bag now, all it is just parchment paper, and then I'm just gonna close it up and just kind of squish it down. So now I have a bag of nice warm chocolate that I can do anything with. In this application, I'm gonna just snip it just a little bit. And then you can do anything you want. So on this one, I'm just gonna do a couple designs. So I could do something like that, and then I could put the dessert on this side of the plate. It's just a matter of what you're looking for. But that chocolate you'll allow to set up and harden up, and I'll show you why in a second. I've made a bunch of these in my lifetime, so they're really quick and easy. But you could do the same thing here as well. And then let's say that is hardened up. We would take our creme anglaise. And all I'm doing is just putting it in the center of the creme anglaise. The center of the chocolate. We'll do a raspberry. We'll do another raspberry over here. And then we'll do a caramel. So again, the chocolate would be hardened by now. We're putting the sauces into the center of it like that. Our dessert will go on this side of it. But the secret to it, and not a lot of people do this or know this, is a lot of times people use a spoon to spread it out or anything like that. I use a bamboo pick, but if you look at the bamboo pick, it has that sharp end, and then this has this flat end as well. So I use the flat end, and basically it's just like coloring, but staying within the lines. So all I'm doing is pushing the puree out into the hardened chocolate. And you can do all sorts of different designs. So the one he has actually today is gonna be a different design. He's got some layered sauces, which you'll see, which is pretty cool. So I only had to have him come in at 5 a.m. to do it.
Can you set those up in advance, Chef? You gotta do them each time.
No, you can set them up in advance. I wouldn't set them up a day in advance. I would only set them up, maybe a couple hours before or whatnot is. So then I would want to wipe off my bamboo pick each time I go to a different color.
And does that work better with chopsticks?
You could use chopsticks. Yep, absolutely. And then I go to a different color and do the same thing. And you can twirl it into it itself, so you see the caramel because it's not quite set. It took in some of that chocolate, but that's fine. So stuff like that, and then you could have the dessert just kind of sit in this area here. So that's it. So that's painted plates, as they call it. But you can do a whole bunch of different things with it. So does anybody have any questions?
Amazing.
Well, thank you. Well, that's all I had. Right on time for lunch. I know that was a lot of information, so if anybody has any questions later on, just drop me an email, or I'd be happy to respond and help anybody out with some sauces.